University of Georgia. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Kim get started.
All right, thank you, Dr. Tucker, for the introduction. Again, my name is Kim Mullenix, and I'm a beef cattle extension specialist at Auburn University. And I'm excited to kick off our first session today by talking with you guys a little bit about some regional research and just provide an overview about this topic of alfalfa in the South. So to get started by discussing alfalfa in the South, why are we looking at this as a potential system for this region? Really, there's three reasons and three things that I want to highlight with you all today. The first of those is, why would I consider alfalfa for my operation? And the reason for that is to improve overall forage production for our southeastern forage livestock operations. And then highlight briefly some of the management considerations and challenges that we experience in this region, followed by a brief overview of some on-farm successes that we've seen with producers who are using this system. And so really this starts with the historical perspective of the use of alfalfa in the South. And this is not a new concept. In fact, it goes back several centuries for people who are growing alfalfa in this region. And Dr. Lacefield noted in his publication that this became challenging due to some of the pest pressure, the harsh environmental conditions we can face temperature-wise, as well as disease issues that alfalfa began to face as it became more widely planted in the southeastern U.S. But several of our cooperative extension systems did extensive research on this topic in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I went back into the Auburn archives, which is part of our library system at Auburn, and I found this picture, which was of one of our county extension agents in Geneva County, Alabama, and he was in a pure stand alfalfa field. And so if any of you know where Geneva County is, it's almost on the Florida line. Okay, so traditionally when we think about alfalfa production, we probably don't think about alfalfa growing in Geneva County, Alabama. But certainly there was a lot of work that was done during that time. But like anything, there's always change that occurs, right? And so during that time when this alfalfa work was going on, we had some of these challenges associated with the persistence factor of alfalfa, but it also coincided with a time where our fertilizer resources, they were relatively cheap, much cheaper than they are today at least, right? And so because of that, maybe the value of those legumes in the system wasn't really what we use it as today, or the way we view that as part of our production system today. And so for those reasons, it kind of began to phase out for a period of time. However, like I said, the only thing that's constant is change. And so we begin to see kind of the cyclical nature of these topics that we talk about with forage production systems. And this is just like anything else where it's kind of had a resurgence in the last several decades as something that has potential application for the Southeast, because alfalfa, as we know, is the queen of forages, known for its quality and the ability to add to our overall production systems. But I think that the way that we look at alfalfa or value legumes as part of our systems has kind of changed over time. As I said before, with cheap fertilizer, maybe it wasn't as much of a consideration to add a legume because I didn't need that free source of nitrogen in my system. I could just go out and provide that commercial product to my system. But if we go in and look at a lot of the publications and the articles that have come out on the use of legumes, particularly adding legumes into warm season perennial grass systems, because warm season perennial grasses are known to be relatively low in forage quality. So we're looking at ways to improve that system. We went and looked at several of those different publications. I just came up with this word cloud here, which kind of shows what are some of the themes that we see as we go in and look at that literature. And some of the words that stood out to me were looking at a systems approach, the ecosystem services that legumes provide, pollinators, management, reduced fertility, and specifically nitrogen. And so those are some of the things we've begun to value in addition to the forage production and quality aspects that we know that alfalfa can bring to the table. And so I think that's really become a focus of looking at the integration of alfalfa into our warm season perennial grass systems here in the Southeast specifically. So why would I consider alfalfa then in my operation, given these things that we've just discussed from that historical perspective? Obviously, as I said before, alfalfa is the queen of forages, high yielding, perennial legume, and it can be used for multiple purposes. So we have some flexibility in the way that producers can integrate this into their overall production system, whether that be from a conserve forage standpoint or under grazing management. But obviously adding that quality, particularly when we may be limited with our warm season forages, is something of great value and importance for us as part of these research efforts. In terms of systems for the South, what are potential applications of this? I think historically when we think about alfalfa production, we primarily think about it in the context of a pure stand, which certainly has an application for this region as well. The primary focus of what we're going to discuss today is integrating it into grass-based systems. But certainly there have been successes of pure stands, whether that's part of a crop rotation system, or even using alfalfa as part of a renovation plan. Maybe taking an area that's in a forage that is undesirable and using this as sort of a smother crop then to go in and be able to plant something at a later time, kind of as a short-term renovation crop. When we look at the current research that's been conducted related to integration into grass-based systems, this has really been going on all over the Southeast for the last couple of decades. And so they've looked at integration of alfalfa into a variety of perennial grass systems, including tall fescue and orchard grass, Bermuda grass, and Bahia grass systems. And so there are some confines as to what works best with each of those individual systems. But it shows you that we have some flexibility in terms of how we view using this crop under these different management scenarios. Kind of going forward, another approach that's now being researched is integrating alfalfa with annuals, even things like summer annuals, crabgrass. Okay, so kind of thinking outside the box again on the traditional uses of alfalfa and seeing can we kind of find a niche area for that to fit into our system here in the Southeast. So the reasons specifically we wanted to talk about alfalfa and Bermuda grass today really start with this slide, in that with our warm season perennial grass systems, we experience moderate levels of quality with that forage early in the season. But as we progress out towards the fall months, we see a decrease in that overall forage quality, which can limit us, particularly in our beef cow-calf operations. And so when we add alfalfa into the system, we interseed the alfalfa in with Bermuda grass. There's a couple of things that make that system desirable and beneficial. The first of those being the extension of the length of the forage production system, or forage production season. And we can see that in this figure here, the green versus the orange. The orange is our Bermuda grass growth curve, whereas the alfalfa really complements that, with the alfalfa emerging in the spring, providing earlier forage availability for us compared to Bermuda grass alone, but also extending that production to the fall, which would coincide with that time when our forage quality is typically limiting in these warm climate systems. So really it's an ebb and flow relationship in which we see predominantly alfalfa early in the season, and then we move more towards a true mixture as we get into those deep summer months, and then more predominantly alfalfa again at the end of the season. And so there are, again, yield and quality benefits of having that extra production associated with integration of alfalfa. From a livestock producer standpoint, how does this benefit us? This figure demonstrates some of our different forage system options that we have throughout the year in the Southeast. And it also overlays for our beef cattle producers when would our typical calving seasons be. So for us in Alabama specifically, a lot of our producers are fall calving. And it coincides with that time when overall forage quality is typically declining. So if we have a way to potentially supplement those cattle during that time period with either some conserved forage of high quality, or by potentially grazing these mixtures, we're better able to meet their needs with a primarily forage-based diet than having to go out there with a feed bucket and supplement them during that time. There are also positive associative effects associated with integrating legumes into our forage systems. And so an associative effect is where we see a positive response by adding in legumes into a grass-based system. And there are several research trials that highlight this, but I wanted to focus specifically on some with perennial legumes. And so when we incorporate alfalfa into things like endophyte-infected tall fescue or endophyte-free tall fescue, there have been trials that have shown how there's increased overall dry matter intake in those systems. So we have overall more net energy elevating their plane of nutrition by adding in the legume component. In our warm season systems, we've been more challenged to try to find that legume that's compatible with that warm season grass. There has been some success with looking at the hay grass and perennial peanut systems, which in turn had the same observations where there was increased overall intake as well as digestibility associated with those mixtures. But until the alfalfa Bermuda grass system came along, then that is really an example of trying to improve those warm season grass systems from an animal production standpoint. So getting started with these mixtures, what are some considerations for producers as we're trying to determine whether this would be a potential fit for my operation? The first place to start is what any good forage agronomist would tell you, and that is with a soil test. But the most important point is also soil test. So we have to have that background information about our operation to make sure that this is a fit. Alfalfa has specific production requirements for it to be successful in our region. So overall, our target pH is 6.5 or greater, and our subsoil pH can also be important because of the taproot system associated with alfalfa. So we want to make sure that we're trying to manage against having a very acidic condition that could limit that overall alfalfa growth. Also, with that soil test information, obviously it gives us the recommendations that we need for subsequent maintenance of both alfalfa as well as the Bermuda grass crop, which have very complementary requirements in terms of nutrients. Alfalfa does require some additional micronutrients that we do not typically think about with Bermuda grass, but you'll note here that we're not talking about nitrogen application. We have these other amendments that go into the system. A benefit of this is that we are saving in terms of that overall nitrogen application associated with the system. And then finally, herbicide management and overall site selection. So we want the system to go into the best site on our farm. We don't want to try it in a corner that is maybe not the most productive or not the cleanest area. This is going to be a high level of management system that we want to put on our best piece of land. And we need to have some history about what herbicides were used in that area prior to planting to make sure that we don't have soil residual there that could prevent emergence of the alfalfa component. When to plant in this system? Planting at the right time under the right conditions, of course, but what does that actually mean in terms of time of the year? Typically, this system has the most success when we plant alfalfa in the fall of the year. And the reason for that is because it coincides with the time that Bermuda grass is going dormant in our overall production season. And so we have reduced competition from that warm season grass component, and it allows the alfalfa to begin to grow and establish a root system prior to that Bermuda grass coming back out of dormancy in the following spring. So plenty of soil moisture and good seed to soil contact is important for success during this phase. And depending on where you are geographically in the region, it's going to shift those planting dates up just a little bit or forward into the season, depending on how long it stays warm in your area. So these are just a few pictures of establishment and kind of the process of what that looks like. These are some photos that Dr. Tucker took at her research farm in Tifton. And in that system, we've noted that planting at the right depth is extremely important to have success and allow that alfalfa to get going in this sod-based system. So paying attention to our planting depth then allows us to have the greatest chance for forage establishment and to be able to get that alfalfa truly integrated into that sod at the right time. When we look at seeding rate, overall, in this system, we can look at reducing our seeding rate compared to a pure stand, in which we're drilling in 12 to 15 pounds per acre compared to a higher seeding rate that we would use for a pure stand system. And because of that, we're looking at spacing this out on a 14 to 16 inch row. That allows there to be some space for both the Bermuda grass and alfalfa to be successful. So that specific planting width is going to be dependent on your individual equipment. But you can kind of see a picture here of what that looks like in actuality once that alfalfa comes up and starts to progress. Varieties in this system are extremely important for success in the southeastern region. There's been a lot of breeding work at the University of Georgia that has bred alfalfa varieties specifically adapted to our climatic conditions. And those are listed here along with our Bermuda grasses. Typically, these are being used in hybrid Bermuda grass systems here in the southeast to be able to have that high level of production that we're looking for to extend the overall forage production season. Harvest management, when we look at taking that first harvest off of the area following the time of establishment, that would be the following spring after planting, we're wanting to make sure that we're harvesting that forage in the bloom stage, so we would have quality aspects associated with that, but also allowing that alfalfa time to make sure it's fully established, that root system, to allow for the best chance for persistence. So typically after that first harvest, subsequent harvests are between 28 to 35 day intervals to maximize both our production and quality aspects. In terms of management for persistence, what is the realistic expectation for us in the southeast for us to have this to last for some period of time? On average, we see that these stands can last between 3 to 5 years, and certainly that's an average, so some may be more, some may be less. It's certainly dependent on management, and I think as we go throughout our presentation today, we're going to have some more specific information on what are the appropriate management strategies for allowing persistence here in the southeast. So to wrap up, just a few examples of some success stories here in the southeast with producer farms. How are people using this and why are they using it as part of their system? This work goes back to ongoing demonstration work that was began by America's Alfalfa and the University of Georgia, where they put in demonstration farms around the southeastern region, starting in Georgia and then expanding out from there, and working directly with producers to try this system on their farm and get feedback about their overall experiences. So this figure just shows us kind of a distribution of some of those sites around the southeast, and different producers have shared their experiences with us about what they're doing with this and why they are using it. So why are they using it? It's really for the reasons we've already discussed. Increased quality, increased yield, decreased nitrogen inputs relative to my Bermuda grass system alone, and a change in the potential pest pressures associated with our Bermuda grass system. So we've been challenged by the Bermuda grass stem maggot, but in some of these systems, producer observation would suggest that perhaps the alfalfa has dissipated some of that pressure, or at least changed the frequency of observation of that pressure. So these are just a few pictures then from producer farms, success stories. This is Ford Farms in Edison, Georgia. This producer was using this mixture to put it up as baleage and he backgrounds his beef calves with this every year as a high quality conserved forage product. Deep grass grazers, Dan Glenn, is Dan in here? There's Dan. All right, this is Dan's farm, all of us standing out in his field, and he's grazing that as part of his beef cattle operation, cows and bull development, and a polyculture system under irrigation. And this is one of our producers in South Alabama who's focused primarily on high quality hay production and targeting the equine market in kind of the Montgomery area, which is a big equine area for our particular state. So each producer has had different ways that they focus on using this mixture, but I think overall the core of what people are saying about this system and how it fits with us is that we're using this system for some of those secondary benefits that we didn't always think about before. Maybe some of those change in inputs associated with it, but also to focus on having that high quality forage product and improving that base of our production system here in the southeast. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition directly over to Dr. Tucker, who's going to highlight more extensively about some of the regional research on this topic and provide some management considerations for us related to